Second. All righty. Dr. Ken G. Sweat. Dr. Sweat is a teaching professor and senior global future scientist in the School of Mathematical and Natural Sciences at ASU West Valley campus and has worked there since the fall of 2000. Dr. Sweat teaches a wide variety of courses for undergraduate and graduate programs in botany, environmental science, and forensics. Dr. Sweat's research has involved a diversity of subjects from analysis of the failure hemp crops in Arizona to using native vegetation to stabilize an abandoned uranium mine to a variability of heat in chili peppers. For his dissertation, Dr. Sweat used lichens to assess long-term elemental air pollution trends in both Maricopa County and the greater Grand Canyon regions of Arizona. Before joining the university, Dr. Sweat worked extensively in environmental consulting and ecotourism in locations across the state of Arizona, from the U.S. Army Yuma Proving Ground in southwestern Arizona to the Navajo and Hopi reservations in the northeast parts of the state. So here we have Dr. Ken Sweat.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. How is everybody doing today? Yay, I see some thumbs up there. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to share my screen. I think it's sharing. Now I'm going to attempt to go to... All right, are you seeing the PowerPoints?
We are.
Outstanding. I am going to give you all, or all you all, proper redneck plural, a warning right now. About 2 minutes into class starting, my computer said the battery in my mouse is running low. So if I look like I'm struggling, I'm just turning off the mouse and going to the touchpad on a laptop. That being said, tonight I have been invited to teach you a little bit about the fauna of Arizona. I want to start with with fauna we don't think about a lot in Arizona because this is an arid environment, because this is an arid state. We don't think a lot about fish. But actually, Arizona has one of the highest numbers of endemic fish, meaning fish that only live in the state of anywhere. And that is actually directly because of its arid environment. If you think about it over evolutionary history, as this environment became more and more arid, fish populations got more and more separated. As those populations are separated, you have time for evolution and differences in environment to cause those populations to take different evolutionary trajectories. And this means you end up with species that are very unique scattered throughout. If we start in high elevations, two of our unique trout species here in Arizona would be the Apache and the Gila trout. These used to be actually considered separate species. We now consider them to be subspecies of the same species. High elevation trout like these are pretty, I don't want to say simple animals, but they really are straightforward. They are predators. And what that means is they basically eat anything they can swallow, which would include actually their own offspring. This is why if you want to have healthy environments for trout and fish like these, you need environments that have a diversity of different types of aquatic environments. And what I mean by that is it's oftentimes helpful to have shallow areas with large amounts of vegetation for the little fish, the younger fish, the fry, to hide in and stay away from the adults that are in the more open parts of the water. But both of these species can be found in high elevation lakes. I'm familiar with them being in parts of the Little Colorado River up in the White Mountains, as well as sometimes being able to find in places like Lee Valley Reservoir, Big Lake, or Crescent Lake. That's the other lake I'm thinking of. Thank you. All right. If we get down into the Gila River, though, we see some fish that look like maybe they've been swimming in the effluent from the Palo Verde nuclear reactor. And I'm here to tell you they're not. These humpbacks you see on both the humpback chub and the bony tail chub are evolutionary adaptations. So what you're looking at here are chub species. These things will get upwards of 3 feet in length as adults. And they are fish that are found in the Colorado River. Colorado River really, if you want to think about it, is the Mississippi of the West. It's the largest river system here in the West, and it's one that has actually, over evolutionary history, created quite a bit of diversity. If you look at these fish, They're the ones that actually live in the lower drainages, in the larger parts of the river where you have lots of fast moving current. And so the fishes need adaptations to be able to swim well and fight that current. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. Notice that humpback above their head. There's been some research that was done in the 20th century, if I recall correctly, using the water equivalent of a wind tunnel. And what it demonstrated is that hump acts kind of like the spoiler on a race car. It pushes the animal down, keeping it near the bottom and helping it to stay stable in the heavy stream flow of the larger areas of the Colorado. As well, something that's hard to see from this picture is the scales are very deeply embedded in the flesh of the animal. And what this means is it offers minimal drag on that fish as it is living its life. I am seeing a warning that I am too quiet. I think that means that the transcript is not working right. Are you all able to hear me correctly?
Yeah, I think that's just for the closed caption, possibly.
Okay. Okay, that's unfortunate because the closed captioning is really usually good. I want to move now to actually what I would say is probably my favorite fish from the Colorado River, and that's not fake. This is the Colorado pike minnow. It is a minnow, and I know when we think of minnows, we think of very small fish. That is not this case. This fish will definitely get over 6 feet in the lower regions of the Colorado River. This particular fish, like the two chubs before, has actually seen incredible losses in population over the last 100 years. And that's our fault, straight up our fault. In fact, up until about the 1950s, wildlife management in Arizona involved poisoning these native fishes to try to get rid of them so they could raise fish that were better for what they thought was the seafood, not the seafood, but the fresh fish market, basically raising fish for food. It wasn't until the later 20th century that we started to realize there is a value to native species. And that's why species like the pike minnow and some of the chubs have actually been listed as endangered. And there is work going on in the Colorado River to restore them. And this, if you look at this picture, this is what's happening in the lower right here. That's an Arizona Game and Fish employee that is showing off one of the fish that they are trying to bring back. We are slowly learning that with these large fish, it doesn't help to just release young fry, and that generally the young ones don't survive. We're tending to suspect that that's because young ones probably didn't live in the same part of the river as the larger adults, but probably live further upstream, which is, of course, isolated today by all the dams we've put on the river. So one of the successful Fish and Wildlife Service strategies they've used is to raise the younger fish to larger sizes before they release them. And this is how they have begun to restore these fish to the lower Colorado River. Now, if we leave the Colorado River system, if we leave the big drainages and we go to the ponds that you see springing up in the desert, if we go to natural desert springs like Quito Paquito on the Arizona-Mexico border, we are oftentimes blessed with visions of a fish like this. This is the desert pupfish. As you can probably interpret from the picture, this animal rarely gets over about 2 or 3 inches in length. It is very small. You'll notice the bluish color to this one. That means it is a boy, a male. And that blue color is how he advertises himself to the females. Pupfish are amazing creatures in what they can survive. Because these ephemeral ponds or these ponds that come up in the desert can have varying degrees of temperature from hot to really hot to not so hot, but really still quite warm. They can survive water temperatures in excess of 100 Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They also are able to tolerate salinity conditions from anywhere to freshwater all the way up to seawater levels of salinity. This is what they have adapted to because of the environments that they live in. All right. And again, if you have questions, feel free to either toss them in the chat. I'm trying to keep that around and look at that, or go ahead and ask them. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions as we go. All right, let's leave the water and talk about some furry friends. Oh, but probably not the fur you were thinking of. This is our desert tarantula. Tarantulas the largest spider species in Arizona, and one that actually instills a lot of fear. I suspect that's because of a lot of the bad science fiction movies that were made in the 1950s about giant tarantulas. This is actually one of the more peaceful creatures you're going to see in our desert. Although this spider's fangs, which are technically not teeth, but actually limbs, chelicera, they are about ½ inch in length. And if it did choose to bite you, it would probably hurt pretty bad, but it is very rare to get bitten by a tarantula. They're docile creatures. What they're more likely to do if they feel threatened is to raise that abdomen. And you see all those blonde hairs on the abdomen? Those are what scientists call utricating hairs, Utricating. I think I got the spelling right. And it's just basically a technical word for saying those are hairs that come off easy and are reverse barbed. So they go in really easy and they irritate quite a bit. And it's a defensive strategy of the spider. These tarantulas live in burrows in the ground and honestly want nothing to do with human beings. Nothing to do at all. Much more do they want to avoid us. If any of you have ever seen a tarantula, I'm going to bet 90% of you saw it in late summer around August, and there's a really good reason why. So if we look at the life cycle of the desert tarantula, the females will live probably up to as much as 20 to 25 years. That's their lifestyle if they live to adulthood. But they're never going to go more than about 1 meter away from their burrow. They're going to be homebodies. Males, on the other hand, and the female can actually mate repeatedly in her lifetime and repeatedly lay eggs. Males, on the other hand, hit sexual maturity about 5 years old. So a male is 5, the mating season is monsoon season, he's going to go out looking for a female. Once he finds his first female and mates with her, some sort of biochemical switch goes off inside the male. We don't exactly understand it, but what it means to the male is the male now understands he has about 3 weeks to live. Now think about this. It's basically a teenage male. It just discovered sex, and it's got 3 weeks to live. How do you think it's going to behave? It's not going to fear anything. It's going to run around everywhere possible to find as many females as possible. And this is what you probably saw if you saw a tarantula during the monsoons. They're males that know they're at the end of their life. They know that all they have left to do is mate as many times as they can, and therefore they tend to have little to no fear of predators or other large animals. One of the other spiders you will encounter in our desert, as well as in our city, is this one, the black widow. If you're really interested in black widow behavior, I honestly encourage you to come to my work. I have a colleague here, Chad Johnson, who studies the behavior of black widow spiders. He's got about over 300 of them at any one time in his lab. What you are seeing in the picture on the right is a female, the large spider, and a male, the much smaller spider. Now, it is true that a black widow female will sometimes eat the male after mating. Generally, they do not. It is also true that sometimes the black widow will eat the male before they mate. I guess that's her judgment on whether his genes are appropriate. But the behavior is far more exaggerated in this species than it actually occurs. Black widows become dangerous because their poison, their venom, is a potent neurotoxin that actually affects mammals. In fact, we strongly suspect they evolved that red hourglass as exactly what we use it for, as a warning for humans to stay away. Because you see, every port city in the world has black widows. They are so widespread on the planet and so often co-occurring in human cities that there are questions as to where this spider actually evolved. Black widows are also fascinating to me, at least, because of the silk they spin. If you've ever found a black widow spider web around your house, you know it's a black widow web for 2 different reasons. One is it has no real discernible pattern. It doesn't look like an orb weaver or anything like that that has this beautiful symmetry to it. It looks kind of like a confused tangle. And if you pull on that web, the web is very strong. So strong that scientists have been strongly interested in figuring out ways to synthesize it to use perhaps to develop things like better surgical silk. I have seen projects that talk about developing a battle armor for our army troops that would be stronger than Kevlar. A little problem though. You put more than one black widow in a room, sooner or later, one's going to kill the other one. They generally are very solitary species. So the way scientists have begun to solve that issue is they have actually taken the genes from the black widow spider on how to make that silk, and they have put them into goats so that those transgenic goats actually express something like 35% black widow spider silk protein in their milk. Once we figure out how to process that into a usable form, this is going to be a much cheaper way to synthesize black widow spider silk than actually using the live animals. All right. Another spider you might be fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to run into here in Arizona is the brown recluse, Loxosceles, and there's a number of species. Brown recluse are also called a violin spider. If you look at that picture in the lower right, you have the front part, the legs are coming out. We refer to that as the cephalothorax, which is a fusion of the head and the thorax and abdomen. If you look at the cephalothorax, and in the upper left picture, it's visible as well, some people thought it looked like a violin. And this is why they got called violin spiders. I'm not sure I see it, but some do. Brown recluse spiders are probably in some ways more dangerous than black widows. And the reason why is their venom is not a neurotoxin, but it induces a gangrenous rot. Look very closely in the upper right hand of that slide, and you can see a hand that is going through a decaying process because of a brown recluse bite. You can get them treated. It did not have to go that far, I don't think. It's been a while since I looked at the story where I got those pictures, but I believe this was a case of somebody who didn't treat it when it happened. And so it got as bad as it did, is what you see on the bottom, that it actually has to be stitched to held together. You don't want to do that. You basically want to make sure if you're bitten by a spider like this, that you get medical attention. Brown recluse are oftentimes found in wood piles or clothing, so you want to be careful around those kind of things. And generally speaking, well, I believe I've seen one or two of them around my house over the 50-some years I've been around, but they're not that common. All right, getting out of the spiders, I wanted to talk about scorpions. This is our bark scorpion, Centroides sculpturatus. It's a very large scorpion that you oftentimes can see in the desert. They can get up to about 6 inches in length. Look really closely at this picture. You should be noticing that there are baby scorpions on the back of this. Yes, the mother scorpion does actually take care of her children at the beginning of her lifetime. We oftentimes think of parental care as something that's been limited to mammals and birds. Then we found fossils of dinosaur nests where dinosaurs were incubating eggs. And we now realize there's parental care in dinosaurs. Pictures like this show us that there is also parental care even in some invertebrates. And so it's a behavior we thought was really unique to mammals and birds, and it turns out it's actually far more widespread in the animal kingdom. Scorpions, as we all know, have a venomous sting. In this case, the bark scorpion is actually known as one of the more venomous scorpions. And let me back up a second here. Bark scorpions do not get to 6 inches. That's the desert hairy, the less venom one. This one generally stays about 3 inches in length, highly venomous. The other thing that helps us tell bark scorpions from others is bark scorpions demonstrate what ecologists call negative geotaxis. And I'm going to put that in the chat. So negative means the opposite of. That's really easy to understand. Geotaxis. So geo refers to the earth. Taxis is direction. What negative geotaxis means is these things like to hang out upside down. If you ever are in a building or anything in Arizona and you see a scorpion crawling across the ceiling, it's almost certainly a bark scorpion. If you are in the desert and you see a pretty rock and you want to pick it up, my advice is kick it over first. Make sure no one's living on the bottom of it. I would really hate for one of our master naturalists to pick up a rock without checking the bottom, stick it in their pocket, and then get stung somewhere they don't want to be stung. In terms of venom, The bark scorpion is got a strong one. The desert hairy, the other scorpion I don't have pictured here, does not have a strong one. There was some really good research done in the late 20th century that demonstrated, if you look at that scorpion, it's got basically two different weapons. It's got its front pinchers and it's got its venom. What they were able to show across all scorpion lineages is, generally speaking, the stronger those and larger those front pinchers are, the weaker the venom is. And the smaller and more delicate those pinchers are, the stronger the venom is. So it's kind of a trade-off as to which one the animal is using to actually immobilize its prey so that it can consume them. All right. I want to stay in the arthropods, but we're going to keep that trend going of more and more legs. I want to talk about our giant desert centipede. This centipede can get well over a foot in length. Generally, most people don't see them because they only come out at night, but they're out there. If any of you ever have a chance to view the old National Geographic special titled The Sonoran Desert, A Violent Eden, there is an outstanding fight scene in that movie between one of these scorpions and a grasshopper mouse. Now, don't worry, the mouse wins, which is usually who we favor. But this centipede does actually have venomous pinchers that it uses to detain its prey. It is also a very fast creature. I was lucky enough years ago, I have a colleague here that I was sharing office with, one of the other teaching faculty, Udo Savali. And on one of his field trips, he had captured one of these centipedes. We had it in a terrarium. We kept it in the lab. We'd go a couple times a week over to Chad Johnson's lab and get a couple of extra crickets that he was feeding his black widows, and we'd feed them to the centipede. The reason I bring this up is it's one of my favorite teaching stories. So I was teaching at the time the first year class. And as a teacher, I often would get frustrated at students because they would ask for extra credit as opposed to actually doing the work of the class. As you can imagine, I had a student in my office and they said, well, is there any extra credit? And having a little bit of attitude, which I sometimes have, I said, sure, stick your hand in the terrarium and get bit by the centipede. Then you can get some extra credit. The student said, but Professor Sweat, I could die. To which I, without hesitation, responded, you didn't think extra credit was easy, did you? Needless to say, that student never again asked for extra credit. Going now into the true insect world, I'm going to start with big. This is the Palo Verde beetle. And this is actually, if you're taking natural history pictures, here's a real good hint, although we may have to update it for the 21st century. If you want to give people an idea of scale, put something in the picture that they know the size of. For those of us who remember what cash is, that would be coins. For kids these days, I don't know, maybe put it on top of an iPhone. But what you're seeing here is probably one of the largest beetles, definitely the largest beetle you'll find in Arizona. And on the right, that is that beetle's larva. So it's called the Palo Verde beetle because the larvae feed almost exclusively on Palo Verde roots. So they will live in the ground, feed on Palo Verde roots until they get enough nutrition to pupate, emerge as an adult. And if you've ever seen a Palo Verde beetle, it was, again, probably during the monsoon season. That seems to be a very popular time for insects to be active. And generally, you will see them flying in the evening. And it's almost certainly Palo Verde beetles that are looking for mates, because that is when they mate, they lay their eggs, they pass away, the eggs overwinter and hatch, and the larvae then again live underground. Interestingly enough, beetles are literally one of the most successful groups of insects on the planet. It has been estimated that 40% of all animals are beetles. Now, I repeat that often, but I'm going to actually have to give you the counter argument to that. So if any of you remember seeing any of the Alien movies, and you remember how the alien egg goes inside of a human to gestate, that's actually a real common reproductive strategy for certain types of wasps. Before the lecture started, when you were talking about different pain scales, you talked about the tarantula hawk, which I might have kept in this lecture. I might not have. I apologize, but an hour and a half is not nearly enough time to cover all of the animal biodiversity of Arizona. But the tarantula hawk does the same thing. It will sting a tarantula, put it in as a coma, and then it'll actually bury it with an egg. But whenever you talk to somebody who studies these kinds of wasps that are called parasitoids, and you would tell them that beetles are the most common group, their response would be, yeah, there's probably a parasitoid wasp, the species that infects every one of those beetle species. We just haven't discovered it yet. So what is the most common animal on the planet? I will leave that to others to figure out. But certainly the Palo Verde beetle is one of the most interesting. All right. I don't want to get too political here, but I can't resist taking a few pot shots at the Arizona legislature. This is the state butterfly, the two-tailed swallowtail. Arizona decided to have a state butterfly, and so we passed a law to have it. But, well, let me read the law to you, and you'll see how Arizona legislature treats that. Arizona Revised Statutes, 41860, state butterfly. Section A, the Papilionidae Papilio multicaudata, two-tailed swallowtail, is the official state butterfly. Section B, designation of the state butterfly pursuant to this section shall not constitute grounds for protection of the butterfly or its habitat. So we can have a state butterfly, but we cannot protect it. Welcome to Arizona. It's actually a really beautiful butterfly. As you can see now, it is on a native, what looks to be a native thistle. They're incredibly beautiful creatures, and hopefully we will be able to preserve them. All right. Now, let's move into the vertebrates, because I know most of us are probably more fascinated with vertebrates than inverts. That's okay. There's a lot to be said for vertebrates. They are closer family. I want to start by talking about some of our reptiles. And I want to start talking about the desert tortoise. So when I first started talking natural history, we consider these tortoises to be two different subspecies, Mojave and Sonoran. Today, we actually know that they are separate species. And if you talk to any of the old tortoise biologists, and I'm serious about this, retired a few years ago from the West Valley campus was a herpetologist named Brian Sullivan, good colleague of mine. He would have told you that 10 years before they had done the separation. If you look at pictures of these two tortoises, you can't tell them apart. But if you look at behavior, it's really easy. The Mojave population on the left, which you will see up in northwestern Arizona, it actually digs holes in burrows and lives in very sandy parts of the Mojave Desert. Whereas our Sonoran desert tortoise, the one on the right, lives in much more rockier areas and tends to simply find refuge under rocks. Desert tortoises are amazing creatures of adaptation. It's actually suspected that they lived here before this became a desert. And as it dried out and got hotter and hotter, they refused to leave. They just simply adapted. And so those adaptations include things like only being active in the summer during sunrise and sunset. It's highly likely they probably even do some hibernation during the worst parts of the summer, along with during the wintertime. If you look closely at that Sonoran tortoise, you will see a piece of shell coming out from under its neck. We refer to that as the gular scoot. In mature adults, you can tell males from females because on the male, it is much longer. And literally, this is what the male uses when he fights other males. When a desert tortoise male encounters another male, they fight. That's the only response they have. And the way they fight is they try to run into each other and use that gular scoot to get under their opponent's shell and flip it on its back. Desert tortoise behavior is really simple. If a male meets another male, he will fight. If he meets a female, he will try to fornicate. That's pretty much it. And that's pretty much interspecies behavior for most species that are not social. We do suspect that these turtles can live well over 100 years. One of the largest ones I ever picked up when I was working as a tortoise biologist as an environmental consultant, we were moving them out of the way of construction of a pipeline. If I remember correctly, that shell was probably a good 18 inches across. This was a big tortoise. It actually looked like its head was undersized. It had gotten so big. I do suspect we don't see them as big anymore, simply because they have to live a real long time to get that large. And there's a lot of problems with keeping them alive these days. Habitat loss, habitat destruction. Tortoises don't do good when they are trying to cross roads. In fact, I remember years ago reading in I believe it was the Arizona Republic, a story about a man they had busted who would deliberately drive on these roads and deliberately run over tortoises. He was prosecuted, so at least there is some justice in this world. One of the desert tortoise's survival strategies is it can actually retain large amounts of water in its bladder. If it is scared, it may actually empty that bladder on you, which can be really gross. We had it happen to a few of my tortoise biologist colleagues when we were working on the consulting job. As part of the protocol for our job, because if they empty their bladder and don't have that water and can't access any soon, it can be dangerous in the summertime. So as part of our protocol, when we handled a tortoise, we actually brought it in overnight, kept it in a tub, in a bathtub in the apartment the company was renting as headquarters in Needles, and gave it water, and then brought it back the next morning to where we had caught it and re-released it. Working that tortoise job was really, really eye-opening to me to see how they try to protect it. Not only would we dig up tortoises that were in the way of construction, but we would have to dig them new burrows. And basically what we would do is dig about a 4-foot trench. We'd have these 3 by 2 foot sheets of plywood, which we would then put down to make a lid, if you will, a roof for the trench, then bury it so it actually looks like a normal burrow, and stick the tortoise in that. And in this way, if we had to take away one of their burrows, we would give them another one and give them at least a chance to be able to survive. All right. Here is our Gila monster. And I know a lot of people have heard how dangerous they are. I know some people are scared of them. Rather than giving you my opinion, I'd like to read to you a quote from the September 23rd, 1899 newspaper about these creatures. Dr. Ward of Phoenix, an old practitioner in the valley, says, "I have never been called to attend a case of Gila monster bite, and I don't want to be. I think a man who is fool enough to get bitten by a Gila monster ought to die. The creature is so sluggish and slow of movement that the victim of its bite is compelled to help, largely in order to get bitten." Yeah, if you've ever met someone who got bitten by a Gila monster, ask some pointed questions. Almost always it is because they were harassing the animal to the point where it bit them. These are slow, sluggish creatures. They generally do not want to bite. They want to use that on their prey. And their prey generally is not things that move fast. The favorite meal for a Gila monster is coming across a quail's nest. The parents are going to fly away, but they have nothing in their arsenal that can help them drive the Gila monster away. And so it will eat their eggs. Anything that is defenseless is fair game for this creature. That's why it does deserve the name monster, but it certainly is almost impossible for it to hurt us unless you're doing something you shouldn't. Now, if you look closely at this one, you'll notice its tail is rather, how do we put it in these politically correct days? Volumetrically enhanced. It's large. I think the modern term is chonky. This is actually where the animal stores fat in order for it to estivate. We suspect Gila monsters are probably active maybe 2 or 3 months, the hottest months of the year, and then only in morning and evening. So the rest of the year, they are hibernating underground, living off of all the fat they stored in that tail. All right. Ooh, Kathleen, a Colorado man died from a Gila monster bite. That is very interesting. I might have to click on that.
It was a pet. I don't know, Gila monsters could be pets, but
Oh, well,
they
okay.
don't seem like they'd be fun pets, but I'll hold my.
I believe we're still waiting on the actual autopsy report too, aren't we, to see if it was the Gila monster that was responsible
Yes.
for death? Yeah.
They
Okay.
don't know exactly.
He was bitten and he did die, but they haven't confirmed that it was the Gila monster that did the killing.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it was the Gila monster, although they might blame the Gila monster, but it turns out that the man had a weak heart or maybe had an allergic reaction to the venom, in which case I think you have to kind of excuse the Gila monster. Reptiles are horrible pets, and I apologize to anyone who has one, but they really are, in that they are never going to have the kind of emotional bonding that a mammal will. I had a pet bull snake for years, and the reason I got it is because I found it in the parking lot at 32nd Street and Indian School here in Phoenix. This is back in the early 90s. And I knew it didn't belong there, and I knew it was an escaped pet. So I rescued it. I kept it for a few years, and then I gave it to somebody else who wanted to care for it. But really, they're not really the greatest of pets. It's funny you talk about that. My grandmother, so my father's family came to Arizona in the late 20s, kind of Dust Bowl generation. And she talked about an 8-year-old boy that died of a Gila monster bite. I can't find medical records of it. The Gila monster researchers, the colleagues of Brian Sullivan I've talked to about it, will say no one's ever died from one. And I also tend to remember, and we forget, if this is something my grandmother saw in the 20s or the 30s, that'd be about a good 25 years before we discovered antibiotics. And in those days, literally any wound you got had a chance to kill you from infection. So again, like you said on this recent case, the boy probably was bitten by a Gila monster. The boy died, but whether that correlation means causality is debatable. I've seen a few Gila monsters in the wild. They don't move too fast, and leave them alone. As master naturalists, I think you probably are all aware that wild animals don't want to be harassed, and we shouldn't be harassing them. All right, so these are whiptail lizards. I actually just recently got a new colleague, Dr. Anthony Barley, who studies whiptail lizards. There's a number of whiptail lizard species in Arizona, like, of course, our Arizona one, the western one, the giant spotted one. What's interesting about these is if you study whiptail lizards, you'll find out that about 2 out of 3 species in Arizona, and that would include the Arizona and I believe the western, are female only females. They do go through what we scientists refer to as pseudo-copulatory behavior. They act like they're having sex, but no genes are exchanged. But this behavior causes the hormonal changes in one of them so that she starts forming eggs, which form by a process called parthenogenesis. In other words, the egg is a clone of the mother. Now, we've known about these for decades. I've taught about these lizards for decades. But it hasn't been until about the last 5 to 10 years that scientists like my new colleague, Dr. Barley, have figured out why this has occurred. It turns out that every female-only species of whiptail lizard is actually the result of a hybridization between 2 other sexually reproducing whiptail species. And that hybrid, though not able to breed with either of its progenitor species, somehow has a mutation that causes, instead of eggs to have half the number of chromosomes like they're supposed to keep a full complement of chromosomes and then to develop into a clone of the mother. It's a very interesting process, and it actually led to one of the more interesting experiences I had as an educator. So in my first few years here at the West Valley, I taught a natural history class and very much enjoyed it. But these are non-majors. And I tried to bring as much evolutionary theory into that class as possible without getting too confusing and too technical. Well, one semester I was asked by a colleague of mine, a philosophy professor, to come to their class and to present the scientific side of the debate between evolution and creationism. I agreed. It's always fun to do that. I went to the class, I gave my talk, talked about the contrast, and then I opened it up for questions. After a couple questions, I had a student raise their hand in the back. Just as they started to speak, I recognized them as one of my natural history students. And they literally said, you know, Professor Sweat, you convinced me about evolution when you taught us about those lesbian lizards. At which point I literally turned pale because that is not the word I ever used when teaching about them, though I guess technically correct. But that day I learned that no matter what words they use, if you have taught something, you have made the world a better place. And so I guess that was one of my weirdly prouder moments as a biology instructor. All right. If the Gila monster is the largest lizard you can find in Arizona, the chuckwalla is the second largest. So many of you should have seen these if you've ever gone hiking in South Mountain Park, Camelback Park, Piestewa Peak. Those big granite rocks with the nice crack-like fractures in them are the habitat for this lizard. When a chuckwalla is threatened by a predator, it will run into one of those cracks. It will then inflate its stomach with air so that it is wedged between the crack and you cannot pull it out. This is its number one defense mechanism. And you can even read in some of the narratives of the indigenous people of this region that they learned how that works. Using a sharp stick, they would puncture the lizard to pull it out because, yes, it tastes like chicken. What you are seeing in the picture is a female on the left, a male on the right. Notice the bright orange tail. And then the striped tail in the upper right is a juvenile, which simply means an animal that's not old enough to reproduce yet. In biology, it's really all about reproduction. So that's how we define them. My colleague Brian Sullivan actually developed a research technique to look at them. So one of the biggest problems you have in wildlife research is if you interact with an animal, you've changed its behavior, and it's almost always to the worse. There's no animal on this planet really, wild animal on this planet really, that wants to interact with humans. We're that bad. And so the best ways to census wild animals are indirectly, by maybe counting nests or sampling feathers that have fallen or something like that. What Brian figured out is these males, to do their territorial display, will climb onto a tall rock in their neighborhood, and they will do push-ups. If you ever seen a lizard doing push-ups, that is a male showing off his manliness. But they will also defecate on those rocks. And what Brian did was he demonstrated that you can count the number of chuckwalla turds in an area, apply a regression equation, and estimate the chuckwalla population. So indeed, when I taught that natural history class, one of the first labs I worked with was to actually take students out to Piestewa Peak Park, send them up the hillsides, and teach them how to count chuckwalla turds. Probably some of the students, I'm pretty sure, didn't appreciate that. Others found it hilarious, but it is really an outstanding way of showing how we can study an organism without interfering with it, which is almost always bad for that organism. All right. We in Arizona are blessed with a plethora of horned lizards. When I was a kid, we called them horny toads. I don't know anything about their sexual appetite, but they're certainly not toads. They are lizards. Horned lizards are actually a group of lizards that are adapted to a diet strictly of ants. Ants are kind of a low nutrition food, so you got to eat a lot of them. And that's why we think these animals are so big and round. They got to have a big stomach. These horned toads are one of the few animals that is highly resistant to an animal bite. In fact, ant bite, excuse me. In fact, most of the ant bites cannot get through their scales. This is why you will actually see them standing right by ant hills, eating up ants, even as the ants climb all over them. What you can also see, especially if you get that old National Geographic special on the Sonoran Desert I mentioned, is when monsoon rains do come, the horny toad will actually come out and it will stand in a puddle of water. But you can watch it, it doesn't put its mouth in the water. The way those scales have evolved, there are very, very small, almost microscopic channels between the scales. They are small enough that they use the adhesive properties of water, and it basically draws the water up through the scales all the way to the corner of the animal's mouth. So the animal need nearly stand in water for a short amount of time, and its body, its scales, will actually deliver the water to its mouth. Kind of convenient, if you ask me. Horned lizards are also famous for one of their last defensive tricks. If all those scales on their body haven't deterred you from trying to eat it, if you found them when they were hiding and really pissed them off, there's a blood vessel near the corner of their eye that they can radically raise blood pressure in until such point that it bursts, and it will shoot a stream of blood that combines with a compound that comes out of a tear duct to form something that functions kind of like pepper spray. And the animal will directly aim that stream of blood at the eyes of whoever is messing with it. Again, that Sonoran Desert video I've told you about has a nice clip of a horned toad and a coyote, and it doesn't hit the coyote's eye, but it puts a stripe right across the coyote's face. And at that point, the coyote is done. It has had enough. It doesn't want anything more to do with that horned toad and leaves it alone. I can remember as a child visiting my uncle in Tucson, right off I-10 and Orange Grove roads. In the desert around him, we would find dozens of these creatures all the time. You go back there now, it's all developed, so I don't think many of them are left. But in many parts of Arizona, I have seen horned lizards throughout the desert. I have even encountered them up in the forests around Prescott. So there's numerous species, as you can see on this slide, that live in almost all environments in Arizona. All right, let's leave our lizards behind and talk about snakes. Apologize if you have a phobia of snakes. A lot of people do. I think they get a bad rap. I think they got bad PR in Genesis, personally, but be it as it may, we fear snakes. And there's a good reason. Some of them are quite poisonous and can even be deadly. Fortunately for us in Arizona, there is no snake in Arizona that is extremely deadly. That doesn't mean you should get bitten by them. So this is the rattlesnake that you're going to be most likely to encounter. This is the Western diamondback. I have encountered diamondbacks in the Mojave Desert that were probably over 6 feet in length. I didn't try to measure it. This was actually when I was on the tortoise job. And what we were doing is they were building a pipeline through the desert. We had to make sure they didn't kill any endangered species. We had to walk the 6-foot trench every morning before construction to make sure nothing had fallen in it. And one morning as I'm walking, I almost stepped on a coiled diamondback. It was a 6-footer, but I didn't see it because when it's not moving and it's coiled up, it looked just like the ground. It shifted its head back into a strike position, and I'll swear to this day, off 1 foot, my left foot, I jumped 50 feet high and 150 feet back. I will swear that. And yes, those measurements get bigger every time I tell the story. I got out of the way, but then of course I realized I was the one who had to move the snake. So using a shovel and some calm language, I encouraged it away from the trench. What's neat about rattlesnakes besides their rattle, and let's be honest, that rattle is a favor to us, because that rattle is the snake's way of telling you, I am here, I see you, I don't like you, but I don't want to have to bite you. Please leave me alone. And if you listen to that, you will never have a problem. But what's also amazing about this animal is look at this picture in the lower left slide. You will notice you have the eye slit. You'll notice then if you go directly left of the eye, you have a nostril. But then if you go down, you see another opening, another pit. And this is why these are called pit vipers. That's something called a L'Oreal pit. And that pit is literally the equivalent of an infrared camera. This animal can actually see in pitch black because it has infrared vision. And this is why a rattlesnake in the hottest parts of the summer can hunt in pitch darkness. Now, of course, it also helps that it's hunting small mammals, warm-blooded creatures, but it is capable of infrared vision. Research that's been done on the rattlesnake actually shows its brain incorporates what it gets from the L'Oreal pit directly into the same picture that it's getting from its eyes that look in the visible light range. And so both of those pictures are combined to give the animal visual information of what it's seeing. Now, if you do want to talk about dangerous rattlesnakes, this one here is probably the worst one we have in Arizona. This is the Mojave rattlesnake, sometimes called a Mojave green because the scales can get so much of a green tint to them. You'll notice it looks very similar to the Western diamondback. There's differences in how the patterns of the scales come together, and that's how people who know more about rattlesnakes than I do, I'll be honest, would tell them apart. I just know it's a rattlesnake and it doesn't need to be bothered. Mojave greens, though, are considered more dangerous because one of the components of their venom is actually a pulmonary poison. It can actually damage, if not shut down, your lungs. So venom is actually a really interesting evolutionary adaptation. As you can imagine, there is very strong evolutionary pressures on the creatures that this snake hunts to evolve immunities to the venom, which means there are very strong pressures on the snakes themselves to evolve different combinations or different variations of the venom to get around those adaptations in their prey species. In fact, we think one of the fastest evolving systems in the natural world are venom and prey species adapting to each other. In fact, you can see different venom mixes within the same species of a snake as you go across their entire range, or this has been demonstrated in other snake species. So generally speaking, venom tends to be something that evolves really quickly. All right, we got one more rattlesnake for you. This is our sidewinder. Sidewinders are most easily identified by that very prominent ridge you see over the eyes. That's the dead giveaway. It's a sidewinder. If you've ever encountered a sidewinder in the wild, they generally live in the very sandy environments like washes and the like. And that sideways move that they have, if you've ever seen that, you can look up YouTube videos on it. We basically suspect or hypothesize, if I use scientific terms, is the way that the snake is able to move across hot sand, minimizing its contact. Oh, I see I lost something in the... Oh, wow, Renee, you saw a horned toad squirt blood at your dog. Yeah, and people didn't believe it, but we now have really good evidence for that. See, this is why I like teaching adults, because you all have actually your own lives and your own experiences that you can share and make the class richer. My personal experience with a sidewinder, so when I'm on this tortoise job, we had to move tortoises, and I'm out working one day. We always went out at least 2 of us at a time, usually teams of 3 or 4, but it was just me and one other guy. And we came across a tortoise burrow. And so we used our solar powered flashlight to look into it. Solar powered flashlight. Yeah, we had that technology in the early 1990s. You know what it was? It was a little compact mirror, like what many women keep in their purse to look at their makeup. You just take that mirror and you bounce the sunlight into the burrow. Solar powered flashlight. So in the burrow, we saw a young tortoise. It was about 6-7 inches in diameter. Only there was a sidewinder wrapped around the tortoise. They both were holed up in the same burrow. They needed to get out of the heat. Neither one was going to hurt each other, so they were there. Problem is, we had to dig out and rescue the tortoise, and while we couldn't hurt the snake, we weren't interested in catching it. We certainly weren't interested in getting bit. And so my partner and I would take turns. One of us would watch while the other one very gingerly dug up. And when the snake come out, the person watching said snake, and the person digging jumped back. It took us a little longer to dig that tortoise out, but we got it out. The sidewinder slithered away. I will tell you now, it was one of the healthiest sidewinders I'd ever seen. Here in this desert, they maybe get to about 3 feet. And this one was quite round. I don't think it had necessarily like had a meal in it. I just think it had been living very well and had a very thick midsection. All right. Now, for those of you who pay attention to the most venomous of all creatures, you will know this one. This is our Arizona or Sonoran coral snake, Microides euryxanthus. Coral snakes are probably, in terms of actual venom, the most venomous species in Arizona, but you almost never hear of people getting bitten. Their heads are so small. On most of us, the only place they could bite you is that piece of webbing between your finger and your thumb. In fact, when I worked on the pipeline job, one of my colleagues was involved in the Orange County Herpetological Society, and they would have conventions every year. At one of the conventions, there was a 10-year-old boy who had a pet coral snake. And somebody came up to him and said, son, you need to put that snake down, and you need to do it now, but you need to do it very gently. It's dangerous. To which the child responded, Sammy? Oh, Sammy wouldn't hurt me. I've had him for 2 years and he's never bitten me. Pretty sure when the parents found out what kind of snake it was, they probably aged 10 years, but fortunately he was not hurt. Coral snakes tend to live at more middle elevations and live in leaf litter, like you can see in that picture. There are a number of different rhymes that you can use to tell the difference between a coral snake and a king snake. Red next to yellow, you're a dead fellow. Red next to black, it's okay. I don't know. I don't remember them all. Here's my advice. Don't touch the snake. I don't care if it's a coral snake that looks like this or a king snake that looks like this. Notice how close those colors are, right? What ecologists refer to this is called Batesian mimicry. So there's two types of mimicry in nature, Batesian and Mullerian. In Mullerian mimicry, both the original and the mimic have the same properties. In Batesian mimicry, the mimic does not. And that's the case here. This king snake is not venomous. It does not have a venomous bite. But if it can dress like a coral snake and make you think it's a coral snake, and you leave it alone because you think you could get bitten by a venomous coral snake, the snake wins. And that's where Batesian mimicry, where you debate, that's how I memorized it as an undergraduate, you debate how effective that snake is. King snakes are actually some of the strongest snakes in the snake community. I have been told by herpetologists that it is not unusual for a king snake to actually chase down and eat a rattlesnake. It apparently can out-wrestle it and move fast enough that it does not get bitten by the rattlesnake. I have honestly not encountered king snakes in the wild that I know of, but they are relatively common and probably not nearly as dangerous as they want you to think they are. All right, let's shift off the ground now and let's talk about birds.
And this might be a good time for us to take our 10-minute bio break.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and take a break and come back then at 7:05?
That sounds like a plan.
All right, how does that look? Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Outstanding. Let me find the chat again.
By the way, Ken, we have a number of very accomplished birders in this cohort. So,
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. I I hate to say it, but it was birds that convinced me to start studying plants when I was an undergraduate. You know, doing a field trip with ecology, and the students that were interested in birds, they'd see a bird and they'd want to know what it is, and they'd grab their guidebook and the bird would fly away. And they'd see another bird and they'd grab the guidebook and the bird would fly away. And I would see a plant I wanted to identify, and I'd grab my guidebook and the plant was still there. And I'd open it up and I'd read a little bit, maybe flirt with the female student, and the plant was still there. It never ran away. And so this is why I work with plants. I know that's horrible. But Harris hawks, let's talk about the Harris hawk for a second. I'm sure many of you have seen these birds. If you look at the picture in the lower right, that bright white band at the base of their tail feathers is the dead giveaway that this is a Harris hawk. Harris hawks are one of the few, if not only, raptors I am familiar with that actually are social birds. They live in groups of about 3 to 7. And they actually hunt cooperatively. Indeed, scientists have reported seeing them doing things like one of the birds will call out, scare a rabbit, the rabbit runs away from that bird, but then one of its friends comes down, grabs the rabbit, and then they actually share the rabbit in that group, so they all get to eat from it. Harris hawks live in family groups, and a long time ago in the 20th century, scientists established that it would be one female who was laying eggs in the nest. She would have an alpha male. We called him the alpha male because he was the only male allowed near the nest. 1 or 2 beta males that were also there but were not allowed near the nest. And then maybe 1 to 3 juveniles from previous years. So we always assumed, because of this behavior and because we tend to impose our own morality on other creatures, we always assumed that Harris hawks were monogamous, that only that alpha male was getting opportunities to mate. Well, fast forward to the end of the 20th century. We start learning how to sequence DNA. We start figuring out how to do, yes, paternity tests. And it turns out, although she may not let the beta males near the nest, many of the offspring in the nest had been sired by beta males, not the alpha male. In other words, she was sleeping with all of those guys. It's amazing how much our technology reveals how we impose our own standards and our own perspectives on the behavior of wild animals without having the evidence that that's the case. All right, Next bird I want to talk about, and honestly, I put this one in here really because of the cute picture of the chick in the upper left corner. That is just so adorable. This is the Cactus ferruginous pygmy owl. You can see from the ruler there, they get to all of about 5 inches in height. They are commonly found in the nests cavities of saguaros after a woodpecker that has made it has moved on. They are actually voracious hunters, considered even a keystone species in that areas where they are reflect better to biodiversity when they aren't. We don't really see many of them left in Arizona. There have been some reports, but if I'm not mistaken, they have been few and far between. There are quite a few nests left in northern Mexico, though. And really, like so many other species, the reason they are disappearing is habitat loss. There simply isn't as much natural, uncontested, undeveloped Sonoran Desert today as there was in the past. All right. All right. How many of you inside your head just went beep, beep? Be honest. This is your Roadrunner. And man, I tell you, when I, as a child, started studying natural history, I was really mad at that cartoon. Because if you remember the Roadrunner cartoon, Coyote always baits the Roadrunner with bird seed. And you look at this real Roadrunner's beak, that is not a beak that is able to eat seeds very well. That is a cutting and slashing beak. Roadrunners are predators. They live off of lizards and small mammals, but a lot of reptiles. Roadrunners, I live in Central Phoenix at about 15th Avenue and Indian School. And for years, we would see a Roadrunner in our neighborhood. I am somewhat convinced that they do better than other creatures in the city because of all of the masonry walls that create great habitat for our lizards. This then allows those Roadrunners to do well. As the name implies, a Roadrunner can run. From what I have read, they have been clocked as fast as 25 miles an hour, which maybe doesn't sound that impressive for those of you who commute on the 101, but I would remind you that without that car, you're not going to run 25 miles an hour. So it is actually really impressive. This is a creature, and it's a creature that actually shows what I think is this really neat way that nature has of not dividing things neatly. So we talk about in animals, what we used to talk about warm-blooded and cold-blooded. And warm-blooded would be things like mammals and birds that regulate their temperature through metabolism. Cold-blooded would be things like reptiles that regulate their temperature through behavior, like basking in the sun or going out of the sun if it's too hot. Roadrunners, while they are metabolically regulating their behavior, have been noticed in the mornings, they will actually turn and face the sun and fluff open their chest feathers so they can take that direct sunlight onto their skin and increase their body temperature, making them kind of technically halfway between or somewhat between cold-blooded and warm-blooded. But of course, Mother Nature never cared about those exact differences. She was quite happy just making creatures that survive. Here's the largest bird you will see in the Southwest. This is the California condor. And it is really convenient that these condors have feathers that pattern in a unique number for every condor. You can see that 33 on this one. Okay, you know I'm joking about that. By the 1980s, DDT, which concentrates up food chains, concentrates in birds and starts destroying their ability to lay strong eggs, meaning that the adults will kill their young while they're trying to incubate eggs, had devastated the condors. Condors were reduced to less than 24 in the wild. The decision was made and they were captured, taken to a zoo. They sprayed them and sent to extinction the condor bird lice species. Sometimes we have to send a species to extinction to save one. Today, we have begun reintroducing them. They have been reintroduced in the Ventura Canyon area in Southern California, as well as the Vermilion Cliffs of the Grand Canyon. This is an incredible bird with a wingspan of about 10 feet. It is a vulture, though. It eats dead things. One of the other things you'll notice on that one flying is notice how white the feet are. One of the tricks condors and other vultures use to stay cool is something we scientists call urohydrosis. Remember, birds don't actually urinate. The white part of their droppings is actually the crystallized uric acid from protein metabolism, what we urinate for. And the brown part is, of course, the fecal matter. Condors and vultures literally poop on their legs. And as that water evaporates, it helps keep them cool. This is what we call urohydrosis. But that is one of the tricks they have in order to keep cool in their hot environments. Interestingly enough, most birds have almost no sense of smell. Condors, on the other hand, have one of the most elaborately adept senses of smell. In fact, I just got an email today from a grad student listserv at the Tempe campus looking at a research article that was actually looking at condor neural anatomy, their brains, to figure out how this animal had acquired in its evolutionary history its very strong abilities to smell. All right. Hummingbirds. Everybody loves hummingbirds. That's because you don't know anything about them. Hummingbirds are actually really violent creatures. If you've ever seen a hummingbird chasing another one, those are males. They're staking out territories because the male stakes out a territory with resources in it, i.e. flowers or nectar sources. If you keep a hummingbird feeder out, a male's going to set it as a territory. And then if a female wants to feed, she has to let him have sex. That's basically the exchange that occurs. You can see in this particular picture, these are two common hummingbird species. There's 14 species of hummingbirds that can be found in Arizona. Anna's is the most common and is here year-round. Costa's is also common. You'll notice on the top, the females look almost the same. It's the males that are brightly colored, and that's a direct result of them having to compete for mates. One of the neatest things I learned about hummingbirds from this book, if you look at my picture, The Natural History of the Sonoran Desert, put out by the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum, is at that museum, they have a hummingbird exhibit. And one year back in the late 20th century, they went through and cleaned it up, refurbished it and all that, moved the hummingbirds back in. And the hummingbirds couldn't make nests. They would not stay together. And this was really confusing until somebody studied those hummingbirds and looked at ones in the wild, and they figured out hummingbirds build their nests by stealing spider webs. And since the enclosure had been all cleaned out, there were no spiders in it. And so there were no spiders for the hummingbirds to steal web from to make their nests. So this is how we learn some of these behaviors in captivity of these animals. Incredibly high metabolisms. Hummingbird really are the sugar junkies of the natural world, and very pretty as well. Here's another common species to our Sonoran Desert region. This is a common group of species. These are woodpeckers. Woodpeckers, as you can see on the right with that Gila woodpecker, are responsible for building nests in the saguaro. It's probably a really great place to build their nest. If you've ever seen a saguaro with a cavity nest near the top and the top has collapsed, this is really common. I saw a lot of this when I traveled through the Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge years ago. Those are usually made by the middle species of hummingbird, the gilded flicker. Its beak is not as strong as the Gila woodpecker and generally can't get through the parts of the saguaro that are more mature with the stronger ribs or vascular tissue. On the left is the ladder-backed woodpecker. This one does not generally nest in saguaros. They are more likely to be found in, I believe this one is on a mesquite tree. If you look closely at the woodpecker on the far right, the Gila woodpecker, you can see how, and you can actually see this on the middle picture as well. Woodpecker feet are what scientists call zygodactyl. And what that basically means is instead of having 3 toes forward and 1 back, they have 2 toes forward and 2 toes back. So their footprint literally looks like an X. And we suspect this is to help them grip onto vertical surfaces when they forage for food and peck at things. Woodpecker tail feathers also end in a very sharp point. So what the woodpecker will do is when it lands on that surface, wedge the tail feathers in, and that acts as like a 3-point stabilization so that when it literally bangs its head on the surface, it can be stable. All right, here are our wrens. On the left, you have the cactus wren, our state bird. On the right, you have a canyon wren, a very similar looking creature found mostly in canyons and other rocky areas of the state. Cactus wren are notoriously famous for building their nests in cholla and other type of cacti. It's my understanding from back from my old Jeep tour days that if you're eating at some of the outdoor cafes in Scottsdale, cactus wren will actually bravely come in and steal food from you. They don't consider it stealing. They consider it optimal foraging, but you will probably consider it stealing. Not necessarily the best thing to say about our state bird. But they are generally speaking a rather attractive species. Their nests differ from other birds in that they are enclosed. You have an entrance in the side. The cactus wren on the right, living in, or the canyon wren on the right, living in canyons and rocky areas. I was first introduced to this bird when I was traveling through the Cabeza Prieto Wildlife Refuge down in southwestern Arizona. And I was introduced to its call. This bird literally sounds like an electronic device whose battery is running dead. If I can, I will imitate it. Literally sounds like an electronic device whose battery is going dead. So it's a real easy call to recognize. All right. I saved the closest relatives to last, the mammals. So let's start talking about dogs. And in this case, we're going to talk about the Mexican wolf. The Mexican wolf is one of 5 species of wolves that were alive in North America when the Vikings first got here, still alive in North America when Columbus got here. 2 of those species are now extinct. The red wolf in southeastern America, Georgia and the like, is on the verge of extinction. The Mexican wolf here in the Southwest is also on the verge of extinction. They have been captured, bred, and are being reintroduced. In this case, they're being reintroduced to the Blue Ridge Mountains in eastern Arizona. It was part of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. Wolves are incredibly charismatic species, very beautiful. And what's interesting is there are really less than a handful of documented attacks of wolves on humans in North America, all of which, or almost all of which, come from the 21st century. This is not a behavior that was native to the wolves in North America. They generally would simply run away from humans. We brought with us, however, to America, those of us who descended from European stock, stories of wolves. And you know what I'm talking about. It's little, it's red, it rides, it has a hood. And those stories shaped a dislike and fear of this species that continues to today. Another canine that we're all familiar with is the coyote. Coyote is not an apex predator. It can be a predator. It can be a scavenger. It even eats sometimes in the summertime saguaro fruits. I've seen coyotes scat after the saguaro fruits have fallen off the saguaros, literally filled with the seeds of saguaros. Coyote is actually one of the few creatures that has expanded its range as Europeans settled North America. It is now found in almost every state except, I believe, Hawaii, and I think it's Delaware it hasn't been spotted in yet. And I think that's just really that people haven't looked hard enough. This is a highly intelligent animal, highly charismatic, although some indigenous cultures, such as the Dene, or who we call Navajo, think that they are an ill omen. But it's an incredibly smart animal that can live almost anywhere. It would not surprise me. I have seen coyotes off of Central Avenue near Dunlap, where the Grand Canal is. And so it wouldn't surprise me that you see them more and more in the city. Here's our kit fox. Oh, aren't they cute? Kit foxes live in desert environments. You see the 3 of them there curled up under a creosote bush. Kit foxes are famous for preying almost exclusively on kangaroo rats and the other types of mammals that live in this desert. They are an incredibly shy species. Supposedly, you're never going to see them in the city, but I do believe once near about Dunlap and 27th Avenue, I saw an animal that I was almost certain was a kit fox. As you can tell from the large ears, go back to that Red Riding Hood story, this animal does have very good hearing, and it is well adapted. Like the animals it preys on, it's only going to be active at sunrise and sunset, and it's going to, in general, stay as far away from humans as possible. Here's a mountain lion, one of the largest predators you'll see in Arizona. Mountain lions are ambush predators. If one is going to eat you, you will not know about it until it is on your back, breaking your neck. They like to hide up above and jump down on their prey. Mountain lions, 85% of their diet is deer, whitetail or mule deer. They are deer junkies. I will tell you though, there was a time I was out in the desert with game and fish looking for tortoises, and we came across a desert tortoise carcass, and it had very obviously been cracked open by a mountain lion. But what was neat is we took a really close look at the shell, and you could actually see two sets of bite marks, one that looked like an adult mountain lion and one that looked about a half to a third that size. And I've always kind of liked to think that one day there was a mountain lion with her cub, and they came across a tortoise. And the mom said to the kid, okay, look, these things don't taste good, and generally you're not going to want to do this, but if you're really desperate, here's how you eat a desert tortoise. And on that day, she showed her cub how to get an easy, if not great, meal from that reptile. Mountain lions have oftentimes been blamed for things like declines in bighorn sheep populations. I think the jury's still out on whether that's the case or not. Interestingly enough, when Game and Fish has proposed increasing hunting of mountain lions to help the bighorn, it hasn't made a difference because the animal is so difficult to hunt that hunting in and of itself does not appear to be an effective way to regulate mountain lion populations. Here is our state mammal. This is the ringtail. It used to be called a cat, but it's not a cat. It's a procyanid, and that means it's more closely related to raccoons and the like. As you can see on this picture, beautiful white and black striped tail. Ringtails have retractable claws. But what really makes them different from cats is the ringtail can actually rotate its hind paws a full 180 degrees, which means it can actually walk down vertical surfaces by keeping those rear paws rotated so the claws are still gripping as it walks down. This, like a raccoon, is a complete omnivore. It will eat small reptiles, much smaller mammals if it finds them, but it will eat grubs, it will eat fruit, it will eat seeds, basically eats anything it wants that's small enough. Often during the times of settling, these animals were apparently not afraid of humans at all, and also picked up the nickname of miner's cat because they would often befriend the miners and the like and end up living with them as pets. I don't recommend any wild animal as a pet. And certainly today, the ones ringtails I've seen in the wild would not have anything to do with humans. If you travel to southeastern Arizona, up into the Sierra Madres, you might run into this relative of the raccoon. This is the coati or coatimundi, Nasua nasua being the Latin name. These are larger animals, about the size of a small dog. They generally run in troops of about 10 or more. I've heard up to 30. They're fruit eaters. They also are confused with cats because they walk with their tail standing straight up, just like a cat does sometimes. But again, they're not. They do tend to sleep in trees in the kind of oak scrub of the Sierra Madres, so they can get away from predators that way. I was actually really shocked to learn on Next Door Neighbor, which is an online app. It's kind of like Facebook, but you actually have to go into neighborhoods based on your address. There is apparently a coati wandering around the Central Phoenix neighborhood, or was at least a year or two ago when I saw those. Totally out of its range, but animals survive where they survive. They don't really read our books to make sure they're in the right place. Nope, one too far. I definitely didn't want to talk about Arizona's wildlife without talking about bats. Bats are wonderful creatures. Bats, like the Mexican long-tongued bat you see in the bottom, are believed to be the major pollinators of saguaros. If you know anything about a saguaro, it has a beautiful white flower. White is a color that's most visible at night. Bats are out at night. We strongly suspect anything with a white flower is pollinated by a nocturnal creature, bat or a moth. Bats are also some of the most effective insect controls. Go around the city really late at night. Anywhere you see a canal with a road bridge over it, almost certainly there are bats that roost under there. And if you look into the light around the streetlights, you will oftentimes see those bats, especially in the summertime at night, eating insects around them. A lot of people are afraid of bats because Dracula. I mean, but honestly, these are some of the best creatures we have to control insects. Here is our black-footed ferret. This is a relative of the weasel. Lived in open grassland areas, was a predator on prairie dogs, and we almost sent the Blackfoot ferret to extinction. And it wasn't because we hunted the ferret, it's because we tried to get rid of all the prairie dogs because they made holes in our grasslands that caused our sheep to trip and break their legs. Literally, this is why we went after prairie dogs. Now we have realized that prairie dogs are perhaps valuable, and we've taken steps to protect them. Arizona Game and Fish, in cooperation with the Phoenix Zoo, has an incredible program to help reestablish black-footed ferrets, including vaccinating them against distemper, which turns out to be a disease that they are highly susceptible to. All right. Excuse me. I got to go a little fast here and make sure I get all the slides in time. I apologize for that. We all know javelinas, I hope, our local peccary or wild pig, though they're not as closely related to pigs as one might think. Javelinas are interesting creatures. We actually suspect they didn't live in Arizona originally, but came following Father Kino and the Spanish. There's a couple of reasons why. Javelinas are at the complete north end of their distribution in Arizona. They actually have to huddle together at night because they get too cold. There is no indigenous word for javelina in Arizona. Most of what the indigenous people call them are derivations of Spanish words. Javelina really, really love to eat prickly pear. It's amazing to watch them eat the prickly pears. You can see the one on the left, although that's not a great resolution picture. Anything else you would think would eat that cactus and get totally stabbed in the mouth by spines, but they seem to do it just fine. When Father Kino and the Spaniards came to Arizona, they brought with them livestock, cattle. When cattle overgraze areas, prickly pear tends to move in. If you've ever looked at the land around the Sunset Point rest stop on I-17, you see a lot of prickly pear. It's a good sign that it's overgrazed. Since the cattle were coming through and overgrazing, increasing the prickly pear, we think this is why the javelina followed them. There are stories of javelina charging and attacking people. Brian Sullivan, who I've mentioned before in this talk, talks about being in the field once and being charged by a javelina. It is quite rare, though. I certainly have never been harassed by a javelina. And I've seen a number of them in the wild. All right, here is our bighorn sheep. This particular animal is obviously lives in the mountain regions of Arizona, although pre-settlement, it probably ranged all the way down into Papago Park by the zoo. Desert bighorn sheep are basically their survival strategies to escape predators by running up the mountain. Their hooves have a center part that is soft and springy and seems to act almost like a suction cup that helps them to grip onto the mountainous areas. Their lambs are literally within hours of being born up and running and up and down these mountains and able to escape predators. They are amazing creatures. I had the good fortune of going with Arizona Game and Fish once in July up to the Hoover Dam area where they do their sheep census, because the sheep all come to the river because at that time of the year they need the water. And it was just amazing, amazing to see these creatures. I want to talk quickly about the largest mammal you're going to see in Arizona, our elk. Elk are large. And what's really impressive is look at the antlers on that elk in the lower right. He's going to drop them and regrow a rack like that every year of his adult life. In fact, I'm told by hunters, if you want to find the time of year that it's hardest to find male elk, it's right after they drop their antlers. I guess they're so embarrassed at losing their manhood that they have to hide. These creatures are really common through the mountain areas of Arizona. You can see on that range map there, it's basically the Upper Mogollon Rim country. Incredibly neat animal. They have a harem strategy to reproduce. And what I mean by that is a male will put together a harem and defend it from other males. But one of the things they don't teach you in your generic biology class is there's another strategy to reproduce. Let's imagine you're a boy elk, but you're not the biggest, you're not the strongest, but you still want to have some kids. You will then stalk an elk who has a big harem, Wait for him to get into a fight with another elk, and while they're fighting, you're going to go up to one of the girls and say, hey, baby, you like me? I'm right here. I'm right now. It's what ecologists have literally called the sneaky male strategy. As long as he pulls it off right, he's going to get one chance to reproduce before whatever male wins the fight comes over there and kicks his butt and get out of there. And so if you're not the biggest or strongest, there are still ways that you as a sneaky male can reproduce. All right. I want to end this lecture talking about pack rats. And the reason I chose this one to end on is it's a really neat creature. If you look at the picture on the right, that pile of vegetation on the prickly pear is a nest or midden. Pack rat middens are the nests they make, and they actually leave those nests to their children. They've taken pack rat middens from cliffs in Arizona, carbon dated them, and then looked at the pollen in them in order to reconstruct ecosystems from as long as 10,000 years ago. Pack rats are also called trade rats. They are fascinated by shiny objects. They're not actually trading. Here's what happens. Let's say a pack rat finds a shiny object. Ooh, it's carrying it. Then it comes into your campsite and it sees your wedding ring that you foolishly left out in the open. The pack rat wants it, but it's got something in its mouth. What does it do? Well, it drops what is in its mouth and picks up your wedding ring. And so you get up the next morning, you're like, wow, the rat traded me this useless old shell for my wedding ring. It wasn't really a trade. It was more of the attention span of the pack rat. All right. I'm going to end this there. Ooh, coyotes eat date palm tree fruit in Sun City. That does not shock me, Ann. Herds of javelina in Flagstaff, Andrea. You know, apparently there's a herd of javelina in Sedona that has been trashing golf courses, and they get a lot of support actually on Twitter, Team Javelina. All right, I'm going to stop the share there. I realize I've run over a little. I apologize, but I am more than happy to answer your questions.
You have not run over, Ken. You have plenty of time if there's something you still want to add.
Oh, I did not realize that. Somehow in my schedule, it was to end at 7:30.
Oh, no.
Oh, well, let's open it up to questions. I want to hear what you folks have to say. One of the things I really don't like about Zoom is you don't get that kind of interaction. I think we're shyer at interrupting people over the computer. So let's field some questions. What do you folks want to learn more about?
They're not
Did I
usually
miss-
shy.
Not all at once. It'll scare me.
Did I miss you say something about mule deer?
I did not include mule deer, Joette. I apologize for that. I literally made fauna of the Sonoran Desert a third of a semester when I taught natural history. And even then, I don't think I covered all the species I wanted. So I apologize. I asked Karen if I could have 6 weeks of classes with you all. And she said that was really asking too much. So sorry, Karen, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus.
That's okay. You can come back this summer for one of our summer presentations.
Oh, that'd be great. I'll be around this summer. Definitely shoot me an email.
Amir has a great comment in the chat. Could you talk about jaguar and other animals or flora affected by the border?
Well, first off, let's talk about jaguars. How neat. They're not supposed to be in Arizona, right? They're supposed to only be in Mexico, but no one told them that. And back in, I think it was the 70s, there was a group of people hunting mountain lion in southeastern Arizona, and they were chasing what they thought was a mountain lion. But unlike mountain lion, so mountain lion avoids water like a domestic cat. This cat they were chasing would run right through the streams. When they finally treed it, they took some pictures. And for those of you who are old enough to remember what this is, it was on 110 film cartridge camera. Ooh. But it was a jaguar. It was the first one that had come back across the border. We've seen a few more. I'm sure you follow the news. Yeah, they have a problem crossing the border when you put a whole bunch of shipping containers as a wall or build some other kind of wall. And this is one of the biggest problems that groups like the Center for Biological Diversity have worked on. is if we militarize that border, we will stop migrations across it of all of the wildlife that really never had any idea of human political abstractions at all. But they just call this whole area their home. And this is a really huge issue in terms of conservation. Well, there are political solutions to it that are far and away not at all part of this class. But let me be very clear. The kinds of walls that they build on the border and the kinds of separation it does are detrimental to biodiversity and are not in the best interest of preserving that biodiversity. All right, roof rats native. So, Anne, roof rat isn't a species. Roof rats are just your generic Norway rat that has adapted to living in areas where they grow lots of citrus by climbing on roofs and climbing into citrus trees. It's just your normal urban rat. It has evolved to take advantage of our environment. Do they carry disease? Probably. That's what rats do. You know, we strongly suspect rats and the fleas on them were what carried the bubonic plague through most of Europe. I have never heard of them being a problem carrying disease here. I would say if you have issues with them in your yard, you need to do things like keep all your trees trimmed so the trees don't touch the roof. Go through your house externally and close any holes that are big enough to let those rats in. We're never going to control them. You just can't. They're too successful at living with us. But what you can do is keep them out of the areas you don't want them. I know some people have had some success. If you can keep the tree completely isolated, to put like wrap the trunk with a piece of sheet metal so that the rat can't climb up it. I know some people have had success with that, others have not. But basically, calling them roof rats, I think, was someone in the media's trick to get more clicks, to get more eyeballs to look at an article. They're just rats. How often do ringtails find their way into urban areas? Brad, that's a really good question. I've never seen many ringtails in urban areas. You say you saw one running around outside a lumber store on Southern Avenue in Mesa. That doesn't surprise me. I mean, if you think about it, every year there's more and more city and less natural areas. So animals are going to have to figure out ways to survive in those natural areas on their own. And we're going to see more of that, you know, for better or for worse, we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, I kind of suspected that it might have accidentally hitched a ride on some of the lumber that made its way there or something.
It might have. I've heard stories like that and strange stuff like that. I have no idea.
I was just shocked. I just recently moved to Arizona. I was familiar with ringtails because I've seen them in Texas, but there were some other people that were like, "Is that a lemur?" And I had to do a double take, but I realized it was a ringtail.
Yeah, that's funny. So are bat species carriers for rabies? Colleen, from what I understand, we've never strongly documented rabies in bats. We have certainly never documented rabies transmission to humans. But bats do carry disease. In fact, bats are considered to be where coronaviruses are harbored, and in fact, might well be the source of the COVID-19 from bats in China. So don't pet them, don't play with them, stay away from them. Amanda, how widespread are black bear in Arizona? Another species I didn't get to talk about, but apparently the White Mountains of Arizona have one of the highest densities of black bear anywhere in the United States. There is, from what I understand, a heck of a lot of them up there. I've never run into one, and I did a lot of camping up there in my younger day, which was good. Because, I mean, sure, they're not the worst bear you could encounter. It's not like a grizzly or a polar bear, but it would mess you up. Barbara, pronghorn sheep. Do you mean pronghorn antelope? Yeah, so pronghorn, and I see Ian, you'd like to hear about pronghorns too. Pronghorns are really neat. I had a student years ago, got out of ASU, got a master's, then came back, and her job, she had to get up early in the morning, hike up to one of the mountains down at the Goldwater Range, which is down in southwestern Arizona, look with her binocs, her field glass, find the pronghorn, call those locations into the Air Force so that the Air Force wouldn't drop munitions on those areas. So their job was literally to make sure the Air Force knew where the pronghorns were so that they would not get blown up. Pronghorn are a really neat creature. Their vision is probably better than a 10x binocular compared to ours. They actually run so fast and have such high oxygen demands that they will swallow air in order to get that to diffuse through the stomach into the circulatory system to help their breathing. Their challenges are really based on habitat loss. There was a group of pronghorn near Prescott that literally got fenced in by all these leapfrog developments out in the middle of nowhere, and they had to be captured and moved out of the city area because they were basically caught in an area that was too small for them. The uniqueness, Dave, I'll get to that, and Colleen, the burrows. One of the neat things, though, about pronghorn is they don't have antlers, they have horns, and they keep them. Although, as I understand, they actually shed part of them in the year and keep part of them. So maybe they're halfway between horn and antler. A hantler, an ourn, I don't know. Bigfoot, hey, there are no Bigfoots in Arizona. No. Bigfoot. I had a shooting buddy who just recently passed away, unfortunately, who was a big Bigfoot fan, loved them. I don't think I've ever heard of any reported sightings of Bigfoot in Arizona. I think they are more likely to be sighted in denser temperate rainforests like what you see up in Washington and Oregon. Although if you do want to talk about a local cryptid, I would suggest you Google chupacabra. That is our local cryptid that you could learn something about, but I am not going to speak about. I've been told I only get to speak about real animals. Burros and wild horses, Colleen, that's a huge issue, and it's a problem. It is honestly a problem. In the year I worked on the Yuma Proving Ground and talked with the biologists that were at the Kofu Wildlife Refuge, burros are incredibly destructive to vegetation here. Incredibly destructive. And there's nothing that eats them, right? Coyotes can't take them out. Because we Americans with our big soft hearts love wild animals, we actually, Kathleen, Arizona Bigfoot, I'm gonna have to check that one out. As I was going back to the horses and burros, we passed the Wild Horse and Burro Act. It makes it illegal to hunt wild horses and burros. And this means they can get out of control. We see those problems in southwestern Arizona. Here on the Salt River, there's a herd of horses you've probably all read about. Those horses, I think one of them was killed, believed to have been shot. Huge stink. It's illegal to do that. But let's be honest, if those horses keep reproducing and reproducing, they will destroy that habitat. And in fact, some of the research that's actually being done at ASU's Polytechnic campus is trying to control those populations non-lethally. And what they're using, and this is really brilliant if you think about it, it's called immunocontraceptive. What you basically do is isolate egg cells, and usually they use pigs, turn that into a vaccine, and shoot it into the female horses. It's not 100% effective, but it basically reduces their fertility by about 80 to 90%. And if you're talking about lowering population growth and you're not concerned about one individual, that is all the contraception you need. So this is one of the ways that we have developed to try to control those populations without using lethal control. People get really upset when you shoot animals, and rightly so, especially if you're only doing it because you've decided there's too many of them. I mean, that sounds really judgmental and arrogant on our part. So wildlife biologists have really sought to discover techniques to control populations that are non-lethal. And that basically means interrupting reproductive cycles. Does that make sense? I always thought that work was really neat, right? Create a vaccine that trains the female horse's body to have its white blood cells attack egg cells, thus lowering its fertility. Obviously, you don't want to do that in humans because in a human, an 80% effective contraceptive is simply unacceptable.
Yeah, but I could see some subversive applications of it.
It's funny you say that. Years ago, when I got out of college, I had a friend who went to vet school, and she did some of her interning as a vet in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, where they did a lot of dog fighting. And she actually joked about castrating, neutering some of these pit bulls. But since the owners would have gotten really mad, they actually make these things called nudicles, which are fake dog testicles. And they're used by people who want to show their dogs, but they don't have to worry about the dog having the behaviors that come along with testicles. So I told her, like, just get some of those, put them back in the animal. They won't know the difference. It'll just be that their dog doesn't reproduce anymore.
A little less aggressive, maybe.
Yeah, well, there's people that I think maybe we should use that technique on too sometimes, but then I remember I'm supposed to be a nice person, and I try not to have those thoughts. Renee, they probably could do that on rodents. The problem with rodents is that there's just so many of them, and they are so fertile. I don't know why people are like, ooh, reproduces like a rabbit. I'm like, rabbit? What about mice? What about rats? I don't know how effective those could be. If you really want to talk about effective control policies for rodents, poisons are almost never useful. It doesn't get enough of them, and you get too many non-target species. To control rodents, it's like I was talking about earlier with roof rats. You got to eliminate food sources. You got to eliminate access to buildings. You got to basically make the habitat unfriendly so that they go somewhere else. And that's honestly, with rodents, it's about the best we can hope for. If you look across all of humanity, the entire planet, there are rats everywhere. They are adapted to live in our cities. I think they've actually found one or two on a space station. I think they've found them in the mini city that they built in Antarctica, McMurdo Station, for the scientists. And no rat lives in space naturally. No rat lives on Antarctica naturally. They snuck in there with us despite our best efforts to keep them out. They are adapted to live amongst us. And so we have to be creative about controlling them. And yeah, poisons sound like a good idea, but they're almost never. Kathleen, that is an outstanding quaddy. Where did you get that picture?
We were at the Boyce Thompson Christmas time, right after Christmas, cold morning, and there was an entire family. There must have been 9 or 10 of them of different ages, and climbing on those little pecan trees way out in the end, making me a nervous wreck. I was like, oh, get back, you're gonna fall. Anyways, watched them for, I don't know, probably a good 40 minutes. They were out there, and then we've gone back and they've said that they've disappeared there. But the rangers told us that there used to just be a single one there. He used to come there for a long time, and then he disappeared for a year, and then this year he came back and brought a whole bunch of people. They don't know it was him. This was their guess. A whole host of people or coatis with them. Super amazing.
Oh yeah, they're really neat creatures. I was very happy to hear about one that's living in Central Phoenix.
Ken, since the subject of jaguars was raised, you want to share some information about the Northern Jaguar Trust that has been set up?
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with the Jaguar Trust. Maybe you could tell a little bit about it and educate me too.
Okay, since the jaguars have occasionally been seen on Arizona turf, in fact, Sky Island Alliance cameras captured 2. I think they said they were different ones late last fall, because there are trip cameras all over southeastern Arizona looking for those kinds of sightings. A group was formed that's been called the Northern Jaguar Trust, and their goal was to work with northern Mexico ranchers who would obviously kill a jaguar because they're cattle ranchers. That's their livelihood, and any animal depredating on their livestock costs them money. So the Northern Jaguar Trust has been doing a really great job with education. There's one little town, Sahuaripa, something like that, in northern Mexico, where the whole town now has an annual festival to the jaguar. They've completely done a 180. And I'm not going to say everybody's on board with this, but the majority of the residents are. And the ranchers are now being paid for every photograph taken of a jaguar on their property. So it's encouraging them to help conserve them as well. The last I knew, they had the trust had locked up 10,000 hectares for jaguar conservation purposes. They either own it outright or they have arranged agreements with the local area landowners and such. And of course, that means that not only the jaguars, but they've seen coati, ocelots, I think even jaguarundi, another very small species that I don't think we have anymore in Arizona, but did at one time. So it's created a serious conservation effort for numerous species in addition to the jaguar. So you can Google them, Northern Jaguar Trust, and they're, oh, thank you. Ian put the link in the chat. So you can check them out and get on their newsletter list. They're doing really good work.
Yeah. So that first jaguar story I talked about, I just actually grabbed the book. I don't know if you, let me get this so you can see. So it's called Borderland Jaguars. It was actually written by the camera does look, I'm gone. It was written by Dave Brown, who's a scientist I worked with when he was still, or I took a graduate course from when he's still at Tempe. And it's a really neat book. It even has in it, let me see if I can get this to show. So here is, okay. Here is that picture I was telling you about from the 110 camera of that hunter that cornered like one of the first jaguars to come back into Arizona. But if you're interested in the book, Borderland Jaguars by Brown and Gonzalez, I strongly recommend it. It is a great story. And they talk a lot about that culture in Mexico, that ranching culture, and a whole bunch of other neat things. Certainly, I would say any of you, if you have questions, feel free to email me at ASU, kengsweat@asu.edu, or if you want to be really creative. So when I started working at ASU, they were crazy enough to let us pick our own email aliases, which means I actually got the Sweatman at asu.edu, and they haven't taken it back from me. I'll put it in the chat. And this goes to, oops, there's only one S in ASU, Ken. Hold on. What is happening here? There we go. So all of you feel free to email me at any point with your questions. I can't promise to respond within 24 hours. I get a lot of emails, and I do try to save some time every day for my family. But I am more than happy to help out, to answer your questions. And if I can't answer them, I certainly should be able to send you on a path that will help you find the answers yourself.
Well, Ken, we thank you very much. Obviously, everybody can see that he is a frequent guest here, comes around about this time every year and entertains us as well as educates us. So thank you so very much. We really appreciate you, and you can certainly expect an invitation next year.
Well, thank you. And I was serious about helping out in the summer too. If you need
Second Wednesday of every month, June through November, and it's basically that's just an hour presentation, so you could choose which fauna you want to explore, and it doesn't have to be fauna, of course. I know your love is plants, and we're looking for plants too. So,
oh, I'd love to talk about plants. I could do that for years.
okay.
In fact, I have been.
Yes, I've noticed that. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thank you all for being here.